Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth McD, and this is Real Life with Ruth McD. So glad you're here today. We are going to be talking with Mr. Davenport. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's been on the show before. Simon Davenport grew up and had some really serious mental health issues. And I've worked in mental health myself before, so has my husband. And what I love about his story is it's not your typical taking meds for the rest of my life, in therapy for the rest of my life. Completely different. This is a God testimony, and I cannot wait to share it with you. You don't hear these too often, not because they don't happen, but because in the past it's been a very private issue, and sometimes people don't want to give what they have to give to receive from God what He has to give. So stick around, and if you know anyone at all who has mental health issues, whether it's serious or it's anxiety or depression or just a little bit of not fitting in and not feeling right, wherever they fall, make sure and pass this podcast along to them because they need to hear it. So I'm not getting into giving you any of his story. Forget the introduction. Sorry there, mate. But he has got such a great story and knows how to tell it well. So if you would, just welcome Simon Davenport.
Thank you so much, Ruth.
I am so glad you're here.
Me too. We had a lot of fun the last time. It really stirred something in me.
Oh, that's cool. It stirred something in him. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So there is a lot for us, and I can't wait to get started with it because your testimony is powerful. But it's a testimony I believe a lot of people are missing in their lives because they just don't give God the opportunity to do it in their lives. So let's get right to it. Tell us, let's talk about how we reconnected. Somehow we met on Facebook years ago, and I was praying for this guy, and he had no idea, and I would just, as I would think about him or his picture would come across my Facebook page, I would pray for him. You were in a pretty dark place at that point, as I recall.
Yeah, even when we first met, you said, something similar. Like it was a rough, from the outside looking in, a rough patch. And I'm going like, well, which one,
Yeah.
It's like there's so many different parts when I look back at my past. And in telling my story, it's not very like linear, it's like, we hear all these testimonies from church or from faith leaders even that, it was like bottom of the barrel. And then it was just like, straight up and to the right. I think when you met me, I had maybe a couple years of sobriety. It was probably clean and sober and served, the Lord and had a salvation experience and fell back into some worldliness. And so I was probably with a band,
yes,
traveling, running from God. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be spiritual enough to not drink and drug like I did, but I was in a really dark place. I think I actually hit another just bottom, totally clean and sober. Doing what I thought I wanted to do as a kid was travel and play music and make my own rules and live my own path. And I found that ultimately I was miserable. Even with like this countercultural like vision of success, like very miserable. And yeah, so I imagine somewhere in the late 2000s, I got tricked into coming to a worship conference here in
that's right,
Nashville, Franklin area. And
well, before we go there, because that's a funny story actually. Yeah. Before we go there, let's go back a bit and let's start at the very beginning. What was the home life like for you when you were growing up as a kid?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's such an important question, important thing to think about. I've got two young kids and I've got a young family God's blessed me with. And I think about that all the time, that the decisions that I'm making as a parent are definitely going to impact, my children spiritually, mentally. And so when I share, my testimony, I think I'm kind of personally working through some misgivings and maybe some static as I really lean into the story, my story, because both my parents are still alive. Mm-hmm. And I'd struggle with this idea of like, I want to honor them. I want to love them. I want to be Christ. I want them to see Christ in my life, but also, like I don't think I should just not talk. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just because
Yeah.
because they're still alive and they see, they see my life, and so I do. There's a tension there. My mom and dad are both still alive, and both in a lot of ways working through their own stuff. But I was raised in it was very kind of a weird thing. I was raised in a family. We had great insurance because my stepdad, had a
That's
good job.
important. It's coming up.
And so, and they really wanted good for me, but they were super dysfunctional. Both my parents were drug addicts, alcoholics, all the isms, all the dysfunction in my family. And so I was raised in a very chaotic, tumultuous upbringing, with abuse, with I was really wounded as a kid. And so I think it manifested like in my life through just chaos and addiction. And I came out of the gate like just a mess. And so, and I don't know if we even talked about this. I've never actually met my biological father.
Oh, I don't think I knew
And
this.
so, so there was a moment, I think I was like 12 or 13. I'm looking at family pictures and I'm like, my mom and dad are kind of fair skinned, and I look a lot more like my mom than my dad. My younger brother's like blue eyes, blonde hair. My dad's blue eyes, blonde hair. And I'm looking at this like, and I look like this little Chinese like baby, like I had very pudgy cheeks, and I look nothing like my family. And I didn't think much about it. And then I was kind of like, wait a minute, like, why do I look like I don't belong? And it came up, maybe between 10 and 12 that I was adopted by my father. My mother got pregnant unexpectedly, and my biological father gave her an ultimatum. It's either abortion or I'm split in town.
Wow, you're even blessed to be here.
Yeah, and my mom wrestled with the thing, and she was a Catholic. She got raised Catholic, and you can ask her. It's her story to tell, but she felt like, the God that she grew up with as a kid reached out and told her, hey, don't harm the kid. And actually my name came from this, I don't know what you'd call it, spiritual experience my mom had. His name's going to be Simon Joseph, and he's going to be a boy, and don't touch him.
Oh, wow.
And so,
I did not know this.
Yeah, and so I'm actually, me and my wife are, where it's like a joke. We're like, find my dad 24. Like, so this year I'm actually going to set out and I'm going to find my biological father.
Very cool. Well, I wish you well. We'll be praying for you on this end that you find him.
But yeah, so I think I had a very, very early experience with drugs and alcohol that really just changed me. My mom, I saw drinking and drug use in my as a kid. And just, swore to myself, I'm never going to experiment with drugs and alcohol. I'm never going to mess with it. I saw what it was doing to my parents. And, but by 12 years old, I had my first, experience and had overdosed on drugs. At 12, became a drug addict really quick. Like my mom, early on, she started going to 12-step programs, dragging me and my brother. And so really my whole drinking and drug career, I was just trying to prove to myself that I wasn't an addict and an alcoholic the whole time. Like trying to, found so much relief and substances. And then the whole time realizing like, okay, this isn't normal, as a kid. And so at 12, I had my first overdose.
Wow,
and
12 years of age.
It's weird.
So if you are doing an overdose at 12, what in the world was going on? I mean, we've heard that your parents were, there was a big struggle in life for them. Obviously, you are feeling the ramifications of that. What was it that actually put you there?
That's a great question. I mean, I remember the first time I had a real, mood or mind altering substance. It was just kind of felt like something. I touched something happened in me that I was like, oh, I've been missing this kind of part of, like, I need this. And even as like like an adolescent, like a preteen, like it clicked. I was like, man, this is something that I need in my life.
So that was even prior to that. Wow.
Yeah. And, but yeah, like I saw all the stuff, like my parents, had kind of split up and got back together, and it was kind of crazy. There was physical abuse in my house. So I'd ran away from home. I wound up in, like foster care at one point. It was crazy. It was super crazy. But I say this, I think drugs and alcohol kind of saved my life at one point. And I found myself like super depressed, super suicidal, at 12. So actually on the tail end of that overdose, I remember my mom looked at me and said, "Hey, like, do you need help?" And there was just like, to say I felt bad was like, I just felt numb. I felt empty. I felt nothing. And I just remember saying, yeah, I do, and so we wound up at this place in South Mississippi is where I'm from, danger to myself and maybe other people. And I was institutionalized at 12 into a like psychiatric unit for kids. One of the darkest, memories of my life, times of my life.
So were you medicated pre that?
No, never.
Okay.
Just maybe like, what's wrong with this kid kind of thing, But yeah, at that time, I think I was 12 years old, clinically depressed, as I think that was something that, and up till 21, 22, I was on some pretty, I did run the gambit of all the SSRIs. And listen, I'm not a doctor. I just have my story, and as much as it's like, I don't want to like encourage somebody to do something that's going to be bad for them. At the same time, like, this is what happened to me. And so from 12 years old until, later in my testimony where I had these God encounters, I was on all of it, all the medication, all the different diagnoses. It went from depression to bipolar to anxiety and just all of it. And I was on medicine from 12 years old to 20 something.
Wow.
And
now, when you were 12 and in the hospital, in the psychiatric unit, it was quite harrowing for me to hear you say this about being on your own and your mom leaving. Mm-hmm. And what does that feel like as a 12-year-old?
I'm a big proponent for like healing and getting restored like spiritually, so. But the stories I can share and the memories I do have I don't feel like in bondage to them anymore, but it's like still very real. Like, I think I have a taste in my mouth for how bad that was, how terrible those memories are. And it's kind of like a fuel to like, I think it's created a passion in me to see other people set free, But I remember, 12 years old, drugged out of my mind in a locked room with, the whole, it wasn't like padded walls, but like that kind of it was sterile. It was terrible.
Minimum.
Yeah, terrible. And the only way to get the hall monitor to your room, you're locked in there, is to slide a piece of paper. They give you a piece of paper to slide under the door. I remember I just had such adverse reaction to the drugs they put me on. And I was just, vomiting and I couldn't control my bowels and just crawling on the floor and just wanted my mom and sliding the piece of paper in and out of the door. And it just like, it's horrible, harrowing, really, like you said. And I'll never forget it. I don't know if it was like I felt like almost like I was transgressed, by God and the universe. Like, why is this my life? I remember trying to go back to school and the stigma of where I was. It just sent me down this like path of destruction.
So when you were there, were you also then at that point diagnosed with different things and
probably the
medicated, and so you're not just dealing with what was before, but now you're having to deal with I am whatever the doctor said to you.
So I'm in I'm 36 now. There's probably a generation maybe before me that was medicated, but I kind of feel like I was kind of like the poster child for like, we're going to solve your problems through medicine, through intellect, through an understanding of like the mind. And like I said, like my stepdad had great insurance. So, I remember just countless birthdays, getting drugged to some psychiatrist, psychologist, just missing out on my childhood and aware that like I was missing out on it. And there was at some point, it kind of became like I was aware that that life was different, that it was painful, and that I had every reason to self-destruct. And again, there's people that's had way worse experiences than I've had. They were traumatized way worse than I probably was. But I still, in part of my mind, I knew that, like, man, I could throw my life away, and I was justified in it. Like, and it was like an angry thing. There was an anger in me that, like, man, I can't believe I experienced this. It, like, came out in self-destruction, but, like, I felt like, man, like, no kid should have to experience this. There was stuff in my life that I had no control over, and I could throw my life away. I could kill myself slowly through drugs and alcohol, through whatever, and I had every right to do it. And it was almost like this chip on my shoulder that I'm gonna burn out in a blaze of glory.
You are on a mission.
And whatever. And that was kind of my life.
So then what did it look like going forward? If that was what you were thinking in your head, what was happening out here? What were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, there was I kind of found out that I had a leaning towards, like, music. I was a drummer. And so, I found this passion in music, and it really took off, doing all the contests and all the stuff as a high schooler, and found it was, like, kind of became this identity, like party animal, drummer. And that actually outlived my drug addiction. Later in life, I get sober later. I still find that, like, being this musician, it kind of made me feel like, okay, like, worthy or whatever. But yeah, like, like the next kind of, like, point in my life that I remember things really, took a turn for even the worst is, being 15. And there was this drug called methadone. It's what they give people to get off of heroin. Was going through my town where I lived in South Mississippi. And one of the guys that was way older than me, but was, like, kind of a supplier, like, kind of got some of us high, had overdosed and died on this methadone. And so, but it was still in the town, and so I guess it was, like, it was a little cheaper or whatever. So I remember I was in a little house party, a band. It sold my skateboard for, for drugs and alcohol that night.
You sold your skateboard. That was a big deal.
Yeah, my band was playing a house party, and I didn't, my mom didn't know where I was, and I got to another low point, and I was gonna check into rehab. So it was kind of my second round of being institutionalized. I was 15. I had just found out. I had just kind of come to grips that I was being sexually abused too. And so, again, everything kind of felt like it was compounding. And so I'd came out to my mom and to people that, hey, this is happening to me. It's all involved in the drugs and this lifestyle that I'm living, drugs and alcohol and stuff. And it was somebody close to me. And so I came out and said, hey, like, this is happening. It doesn't seem real, but, like, I know it's happening. And so their solution was to send me to rehab again. Like, that'll fix it, Yeah. And so I had a date on the books with rehab, and it was like my last hoorah, you know what I mean? So I ingested all kinds of drugs and alcohol and all that methadone. And I just remember winding up in the backyard of this house, and everything was spinning, and I kind of felt like my awareness, I can't really explain it, was like it's like my eye, like my vision was getting just dark, like tunnel vision. I remember these guys were standing over me, and they were supposed to be my friends, and they were like, man, like, we gave him the drugs. Like, do we take him to the hospital? What do we do? Like, if they ask him questions, like, we're all going to be and I'm literally laying there, feeling like I'm dying. I probably was dying. Yeah. And just realizing, man, like, I'm all alone. And my mom shows up out of nowhere. Which is the craziest thing, is I stole the family car. She didn't even know where I was. I was miles away from my house.
Oh, wow.
And my mom's like, it's pretty wild. Like, in her own way, like, she just, like, has heard from God in these pivotal moments in my life. And she said she just got up, put some clothes on, and just walked out of the front door and didn't have any clue where she was going. And she just felt like God told her, turn left, turn right, wound up straight to where I was, laying in that backyard.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
And she has, like, medical experience, and they scooped me up, brought me home, kept me alive, and got me to rehab.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. What a crazy story.
It was pretty wild.
So did that change you?
That kind of made things even kind of worse. Like, so my parents divorced. It was my fault. No one in my life believed that I was being abused. So then I had the stigma of like lying about it, and so I kind of like ran away from just, that life or whatever. I tried to stay sober for a little bit, I had a couple months of just kind of white knuckling it, and I fell off again. Wound up in rehab again at 19, and really just I just thank God that pattern would never end until like I was dead, or I don't know, or in prison maybe. I don't know. Like, I'm just so grateful. Like, I'm so grateful that there was just a moment in my life where I felt, now I know it was the grace of God. It was like in the middle of all that chaos, God just gave me a second, just stilled the storm. I was in the back seat of a car. It was me and a couple guys I grew up with. We were waiting on drugs at a construction site, in South Mississippi. And the guy that was driving had a cell phone. It was just when you could put a picture on your cell phone of who's calling you, was up on the console. And we're all just talking, and we're waiting on these drugs to show up. And the phone rang, and it was a picture of this guy and his girlfriend. They just had a baby. So we're all talking and blah, blah, blah. And then the phone was ringing. Everybody got quiet. And we realized, like, he's blowing off his girlfriend and his little infant, to hang out with us to get drugs. And it kind of like, ugh. It was like a buzzkill, and like, ugh. And then so the phone quieted, and then we, got back to what we're doing, and then she called again. And it was just like the reality of it just punched us all in the stomach, We're all like, what are we doing, And then the guy next to me, he just said, man, this is what the stuff does to you. Like, this is our life. We do drugs, we do this thing, and this is, it's kind of part of comes with the territory almost, like, and everybody's there. It's like, yeah. I just remember something, and now I know it's God. It just when he said that, I was like, no, this isn't who I am. Like I was, and so I don't know if I imagine everybody has this inner, created in the image of God, to know like this is not how it's supposed to be. And I just remember I looked around the car and I said, I don't want to be like you guys. Like, and I saw it. That if I keep going, this is me in the car. And anyway, I got back to the house, and after I kind of sobered up, I called somebody and I said, hey, I'm in over my head. I'm not gonna be able to get out of this. And they got me into a treatment center, and that was in 2006. And I haven't had a drink or a drug since. Wow. So is that 16 years, something like that? 17 years?
Long time, yeah.
Yeah, as a 19-year-old, but that wasn't the end of the story. It's really the beginning of the story for me, for really finding God. It was like a secular, and I'm not against God created doctors, God created, so I'm not like against it, like get help. But I was finally like humble enough and open enough to like,
pretty desperate.
Yeah. I don't know what's good for me, so I made it a couple months. Clean and sober, going to meetings, doing the stuff. I had a sponsor, and I don't have any shade against it. Like, it's part of my story is, those secular 12-step programs. But a couple months in, God just kind of put one thing in front of my path after another. I started playing drums at this little church in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where I lived at the time, for cigarette money,
Cigarette money.
Yeah, like they had like a poster up at the wall. I was going to college, and like, we need a drummer, we'll pay. And I was like, yeah, hey. And so I thought I tricked him. I thought I'd been like, I knew enough spiritual words, And I was like kind of thinking I was sneaking in, playing the drums, getting out of there,
and going for cigarettes.
Yeah, and somewhere in there, I remember it. I was sitting at a practice, and the band couldn't figure out what key we're in or how to play guitar. Like, it was rough. It was rough. And I was just sitting there and listening to songs and hokey songs, right? 'Cause I'm a music guy. They're like bad music. And all of a sudden, I just feel I knew it was God, but I didn't know. I just felt this peace. I felt something happen. I started tearing up, and I'm like, what is this? And I barged into the room of the pastor. His name was Greg. I said, Greg, I got to talk to you, man. Like, I have been really honest. Like, I'm not a Christian, And I thought it was like I was really going to shock them. They're like, oh, we know. I was like, what do you mean, I was like, well, you smoke like a pack a day, you know what I mean? You're back behind the church smoking, and you cuss like a sailor. And we just assumed, that You know, your
Dad giveaway.
Yeah, right. I just thought I was like whatever, and he just proceeded to tell his testimony, and I remember I was like, that's cool, you know. And then he brought his wife in, and she was like a rebellious, you know, pastor's kid, you know. And I was like, cool testimony. And then he brought like 4 people. He just lined them up. I don't know if they were ready, but they just started giving their testimony. And one lady, she was a nerd. I mean, like nothing in common, really. And she just began saying her testimony. And all of a sudden, it felt like, man, I was smiling. I was crying. I felt the room light up. I had like all the stuff in my head just couldn't withstand like this spiritual experience I was having. Wow. And I remember like, this is God. Mm-hmm. This is real. Mm-hmm. And I gave my life to the Lord that day.
And that wasn't with a drug either.
No, it was absolutely real. And there were some ups and downs, and I backslid, and I got real serious about my walk with God, and you know, but there was just this. I was unwilling to surrender so much of my identity, like this drummer, this, you know, this this. I had this idea of like who I wanted to be, you know, and it really, you know, I served. I went to like this camp. I got invited to, you know, play drums and teach like a Bible study at a big youth camp, and I did that. And on the tail end of it, I got a call from one of my best friends who was in recovery, and he's like, "Hey, like, we're ready to tour." Like, he had this band. He was making this band, and I kind of told my friends, I was like, "Man, I think I'm gonna go like quit college and just like travel and play music." You know, and I probably was like a Christian for like 6 months. Uh-huh. They're like, "Man, I don't want to tell you what to do, but maybe think about it," you know. Mm-hmm. And it was like 30 minutes into the band, like I'd already like walked away from my walk with Jesus. Like it was like and so like it doesn't discourage me now as a pastor, as someone that walks with people. Like if God's got his eyes on somebody and like is working on somebody, like we can truly trust that, man, the Holy Spirit is going to do the work. So I wanted to quit hurting. I wanted to not be on drugs anymore. I wanted that to happen, but also wanted to do my own thing, live my own life, go my own way. And so I felt like the Lord let me do it. I went and totally backslid. So much of darkness and a lot of destruction, you know, with, you know, illicit relationships and traveling. And so I'm in all the wild places. I'm just drinking water instead of liquor, you know, but just living worldly. And again, like with this idea of being this musician and this, I don't want to be explicit, but like very immoral lifestyle. You know, like sexually, you know what I mean? And just wilding out in that direction, all the while knowing that like I'm running from this higher purpose that God has for me. Yeah. And at that point, it was obvious. It was so obvious that like I wanted to be spiritual enough to not relapse and go back to my old life. Kind of lukewarm, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. If I would have died, I might have gone to heaven. I don't know. Like, I'll let someone else figure that out. But definitely running from, like, what I knew the Lord had for me. The whole time, at this point, I was probably diagnosed bipolar. And I was on some type of medication that if I missed a dose or two, it literally would break out in a rash. Oh. It was crazy. Wow. I don't even know what the stuff was. But it was, like, so insane. The amount of, you know, in this part of my life, like, I'd always been on, you know, psych meds. Yeah. And so, anyway, tricked in, you know, and started getting kind of hungry again, realizing, you know what, I could sleep with who I wanted to sleep with. I could do what I wanted to do, but finding immense dissatisfaction and that depression and that darkness didn't leave. It was like it came back.
And you felt that from the light to the, from the dark to the light to the dark. And it wasn't drugs anymore because I was clean and sober. It wasn't, you know, I was kind of piecing together some type of a life that, you know, you could say is like worth living. Wasn't that? It was like this other thing. And so I remember, kind of getting hungry, spiritually hungry, thinking, man, you know, like I want truth. I want to know what's real. And if it is religion, then I'll go all out for it. And I was at a place wide open. I was like, you know what? If it's Buddhism, if it's Hinduism, you know, if it's like Islam, and I was like, even
Christianity. I will even concede that if it is really Jesus, if Jesus really is who he says he is, I'll go wide out, you know?
So you're saying that after God set you free and you had that experience in the pastor's office,
Yeah.
you still
Yeah.
felt like, I need to know more. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because I did, there was still, I didn't want to surrender my life. I didn't want to surrender my dreams. I didn't want to surrender who I thought I was. That was what I think I was holding on to the most, is that I had this idea of who I wanted to be, what I thought was going to make me happy, and I was unwilling to surrender it. I could whitewash maybe I'm a Christian, I'm spiritual, but at the core, if I let this go, I just felt like I was not going to be okay. And so I clung to it. And anyway, I get tricked in by this woman in South Mississippi who would have the Walkman on, and she was listening to gospel music in the gym, and she'd be like,
there's a lot of tricking happened in your life.
You got to come to my church. And I was like, okay. I was like, I don't even know why I did. I was like, all right, I'll go to your church, because I was hungry. And man, they were like a Pentecostal spirit-filled church. And I was like, y'all are wild enough. I just appreciate it. You know what I mean? I was like, y'all don't care at all if y'all look crazy. And I can appreciate that,
That's funny.
And then quickly they're like, hey, you want to go to this worship thing? It's in Nashville. It's like a music thing. I'll pay for your food. You give you a little per diem. You walk away with money in your pocket.
Wow.
Now, my band wasn't doing anything that weekend. I was like, yeah, I like Nashville. I'll go, And it was the biggest setup of my life. I show up. It's at the factory in Franklin. They rented the whole thing out. And it was like lights out worship. I mean, people were lifting their hands and they were on their face. They're on their knees crying out to God. I was like, oh, no. I just
You're stuck there for the weekend.
Yeah, I just got tricked into coming to this thing, I was like, God. I remember looking around and being like, y'all look so ridiculous, Literally, there was like a disdain. I was like...
That's funny.
And so I was like, well, I guess I'm here, I'm like dipping out still, smoking cigarettes, you know what I mean? And I just remember just whatever, this ain't too bad. And it was just one moment. There wasn't a preacher, there wasn't an altar call. It was just a worship leader. And he was just exhorting people, like, man, press into God. God's real. God's here. God sees you. God knows you. You're not here on accident.
Yeah.
And I just remember, okay, and I remember I closed my eyes, and God began to speak to me, and I knew it was real. It was the Lord, and I knew it was God. It was love. It was perfect. It was nothing to be afraid of. But I knew this was like a spiritual thing, and God was like, Simon, can I have all of you?
Wow.
Can I have all of you? And my first reaction was like, God, you already do. I try not to cuss as bad. I'm not I'm kind of cleaning up my dating. You know what I mean? I'm not drinking. I'm good. I'm perfect. I'm a righteous man. How crazy.
Yeah.
Thinking and think. On the outside, I was judging myself. I'm nowhere where I used to be.
Right.
And that was my response to really having this conversation with God in this dark room where everyone's worshiping. And then he asked me again, Simon, will you give me all of you? Will you give me all of yourself? And I just remember it was like this time stood still, and I said, okay, yes, God, I'll give you. And I knew what he meant. He meant my hopes, my dreams, my future, the person I wanted to be, the person I was going to end up with, marrying, my life. God wanted that. God wanted all of me. I remember I said yes. And I had no grid for what was about to happen next, but I'm probably 5'10", 170 pounds at that time. And a 5'10", 170 pound being literally stepped into my body. I remember I was sitting there and it literally just entered into me. Every square inch of me filled. And it was like I started not shaking, trembling, my skin, it was animated. And I remember I just felt love and light and peace and it was God. I knew it was God. Just filled me. And I remember I immediately just started crying, and something in me just kind of broke. And I was experiencing the love of God. And I realized God always loved me. He was always pursuing me. It was like this moment of time, but I saw even as a kid with the piece of paper underneath the door, God was there. God was always there, always wanted me, always loved me. you know, and it was overwhelming that like
Beautiful.
that he loved me, you know, and I had no business being lovable to God. Like I was a mess,
Yeah.
and I was running, and I was hurting people, hurting myself, and I was aware like he loved me, and that was it. And then it was like, and on the tail end, it was like, yes, he loved me, but I just immediately got this picture of this whole other life of helping people, of like using me, you know, and I was just overwhelmed.
Wow.
Overwhelmed.
All at the same time.
All at the same time. It was like, I've always loved you, and I've got this incredible purpose for your life right now. Like right now. And it rocked me. And I'm like having this beautiful moment, you know, and I'm like kind of in like not even aware of my surroundings. And then all of a sudden I'm like, man, this is such a beautiful moment, but like someone next to me is really loud. Like there's someone worshiping in my like space, and they're just going to town. And like, and I started listening. I'm like, man, and they're not even from America. Like whatever language they're worshiping in is like really loud, and I don't know the language. I'm like, man, and after a while, I'm like, they're really kind of being rude. Like I'm having a moment here with God. And I look around and I realize, oh no, that's me. At the top of my lungs, I am singing and speaking in a language I had no idea what it was.
That is hilarious.
And I remember I clamped down, I like put my hand on my mouth, and I looked around, and I was like, oh God, no one saw me, you know? That'd be weird. I'm all crying. I'm like, ooh. Yeah, really care about my image here, you know?
Oh, wow.
And
That's
filled
funny.
with the Spirit, wrecked. And
You had no idea what was going on.
Blown away. I didn't know if that was real. I didn't know what it was. There was one Christian in my life. He was a sneaky Christian. He owned this consignment store that sold like really cool merch and band T-shirts and stuff. He like opened up a storefront and sold skinny jeans and Converse and
Yep.
Purple Rain shirts. Like, and he was trying to infiltrate the music community I was in with the gospel. I was like, I went home. I was like, I need to find a Christian. I just asked my friends. And they're like, what happened to you? And they're like, we know one guy. His name's Mark. He's the only Christian we know, and he's like a super Christian. So I walk in, and it was like this. It was a consignment store he was really trying to reach out to the music community in Hattiesburg. And I walked into this consignment store, and I was like, Mark, dude, something happened to me. And he had like customers in the store. And I was like, I don't know, I was at this thing, and there was music, and I love God. And I was like, dude, I love God so much. I love God. And I just started crying, I remember it, and he started crying, and there was like people around. He's like, praise God, and he kind of started discipling me. And
That's so funny.
And I tell you what, like there's been dips in my life where there's parts of me that God was healing and rooting out, but it's never been the same. And I've been on fire for God, full of His love, full of His Spirit, full of this purpose, like since then. And that was like 2009. I moved to Nashville in 2010. I looked around. I was like, I don't even know where this exists. I guess if I want more of this, I got to move to Nashville. And God was like, yeah, do it. So I moved to Nashville, sold all my stuff from South Mississippi to Nashville, and wound up in a church. And a year later, I'm traveling with a huge gospel revival band, and it's on God TV. I'm playing drums. And then like a few months after that, I'm a youth pastor, and then it just took off. Like I couldn't have made any of it up.
Yeah.
Wild stuff.
That is
wild
just
stuff.
So crazy.
Wild stuff.
Yeah. So that's been. You have proved that God works.
Can I share the? Can I share the? Okay, so I'm in South Mississippi. Let me bring this full circle.
Okay.
I have not really been around believers yet. So I'm listening to podcasts, I'm just reading the Bible. I've got one mixed CD, a burnt CD with these worship songs that this dude from South Mississippi made for me. And I'm just coming in after work. I'm working at a treatment center, and I'm just crashing on the floor and worshiping God. Like hours in the presence of God, getting transformed. And I just didn't know what I didn't know yet.
Right.
And one day I guess the thought, I was like, man, God, you're doing all this in my life. I know you're real. I'm like, what about the drugs I'm taking? At this point, I was kind of like, not a conspiracy, but I'm like, this can't be good for me. Like, why why is the God that created me the first time, that loves me, that's real, why do I have to take these pills that's changing my mind, the chemistry of my brain, to be able to deal with life? I was like, that just doesn't make sense to me, not a doctor. So I just started pressing in, and I felt the Lord say, hey, Simon, if you trust me, I'll heal you of whatever this is. I made you the first time. I can either I can teach you how to live with this, or I can literally reconstruct your brain to be okay.
Wow.
And I just there was no one around me. The only people around me was like, yeah, just fast and do it. You know, they're just wild. There was wild believers.
That's great.
So I was like, all right, I'm doing it. And I remember I think I got one article off of Google that was like, yeah, Big Pharma is they prey on, screwed up kids and they put them on drugs for the rest of their life. And I was like, all right, I'm done, So remember, I had these little pills and I cut them in half. I did that for about a week, kind of weaned myself off. And I remember I had some of the most over the top reactions. So I'm like, I'm loving God. I'm in his presence, but like my body's like, I'm shaking. I'm having metal taste in my mouth. It was the wildest thing in my life.
Wow.
Like, it was like a week or two of it. I wrecked a car. Like, I think about that now.
That's pretty major.
If I had experienced that right now, there's no way I would have done it. Because I have so many people that's full of wisdom in my life now that would say, hey, don't do that. But at the time, I was living with my best friend Ben, who was the guitar player of the band, and I had a recording studio, and I'm having these wild encounters with God. It was like crazy, So it just made sense. And I got over the physical reaction. God like walked me through it, held my hand through it the whole time. And I had this experience with the Lord that kind of was like, I don't know. There's a passage in Hebrews that says God's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And my experience, right? This is my experience. It was in the middle of the night. I had just gotten over the worst of the physical withdrawals from the drugs I was on. And it was like a clap of lightning just jumped me out of the bed. And it was real. It wasn't in my mind. It was an audible voice. I heard a boom. I sprung out of bed. It was in the middle of the night. And I audibly heard Daniel 4. And I was like, who's Daniel? Right? No clue.
Yeah.
I'm literally hearing the voice of God. No clue. No clue. And I'm like, that was so crazy. That feels important. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then right as I'm trying to go to bed, I'm like, that kind of sounds like isn't there a book in the Bible called Daniel? So I'm like, all right. So I open up the Bible and I'm like, 4? Oh, there is a 4. And I'm reading the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And the Holy Spirit's like, this is your life. You're this tree. I've got this plan for you, but like you better check yourself, because if you get out of league with me, you're going to be like that tree that's cut down.
Wow.
And it was like almost this warning. It was like this. I haven't even really walked. I'm like, what is going on? And I felt that the Lord was saying like, hey, I've got this plan for you. But if you get haughty and in your own mind about it, like you're going to be the tree that's cut down. Wow. And anyway, I heard the voice of the Lord. And you know what? That was in 2009. And since then, man, I've never been, I've that's kind of a part of my past of having a name on me, of depressed or bipolar or anxiety. And God completely healed me, There was actually parts of my mind and my soul that I felt like that medication, I wasn't able to get into some deep places with the Holy Spirit. And that was kind of the motivation. I was like, I want as much of the Holy Spirit as possible. I want to live in the presence of God. And I didn't even have these words yet. I wasn't verbose in Christianese. I just knew that I'd experienced something that was more real and more powerful and more wonderful than anything else I've experienced in my life. I was like, I just want to live my whole life in that place. And it was the presence of God. It was his Spirit. And I said, if these drugs are keeping me, these good things are keeping me from it. I was so far past the like sin. Is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Is this sin? I was like, that thinking is gone. I want God. And if anything is keeping me from like being with him, it's out of here. It's gone.
That's awesome.
And my life began to totally get transformed through that lens, not through is this right or is this wrong. I want to be close to His Spirit. I want to be close in His presence. And if anything is hindering me, it's out of my life. It's out of my life. And that pursuit of God's presence is what healed me from whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever, it's a mental disorder. I don't know what it's called. I just know that I started encountering God in different ways.
Yeah.
And I started hearing His voice like that experience I had. And it was God telling me, like, hey, like, you know what? Like, if you want the depths of me, this thing is keeping you from experiencing me.
That is so good, because I think a lot of times people fall into the trap of settling for not God's best, but for man's best. And it's not even close.
Yeah.
It's what we think, whether it be the medications or the counseling or the better job, or, just doing things that make me feel good instead of that intimacy that you have found in the Lord and that time with Him and the surrender. We miss that. And we miss that in churches.
Yeah.
We don't hear that full surrender like we should.
The gospel is an encounter with a living God that never ends. You really think, what are we even invited into? What is the gospel? It's not principles for life. Yeah, I mean, there's wisdom in there, and God leads us into principles that where we're blessed and we walk victorious, but it's an encounter with a living God right here and right now. Like, that's what we get. And then when we die, the principles of it's Him. We get a walk with Him. I know we're short on time. Can I share like kind of the latest? So somewhere in there recently, my message has always been just intimacy with God, growing close to the Lord. But God really did something in my life to where it put it moved me from the place of being reactionary to the attack of the devil, to the harm that I was really messed up as a kid. And I remember when I first moved to Nashville, I was fasting, and it was not an accusation I had against the Lord, but I just said, God, like, where were you? Like, I know you love me. There's just a part of my mind I'm trying, I just lack understanding. Like, when I was a kid, and when I was sexually abused, and when I was physically abused, and I was abandoned, and all this terrible stuff happened, like, where were you? Like, I know you love me, but this doesn't make sense. And my eyes were down. I was on the floor praying, and I had this encounter where these two little pinpricks of light slowly came into my consciousness. Like, my eyes were closed, but it was a real experience. I remember I got up, I was like, what is happening? I closed my eyes, boom, they're there. And these two little pinpricks of light were eyeballs. And in front of my face materialized the face of a man. And it was attractive face. It wasn't scary, but it was cold and it was evil. And I'm like, God, what is this? I asked God this question. I thought He was going to answer in a book study or a sermon, and it was like, I was having an experience, a vision, an open whatever, and it was, and I became aware this is the face of Satan, the face of Satan, and I'm staring at Satan with my eyes closed, and I'm like, okay, and I felt a rush of the presence of the Lord, like, this is gonna be okay, and then immediately I was plunged into every single traumatic, hellish, demonic experience I had as a kid, where I was abused. Every time I was crying on the floor, back to that experience of me sliding that paper underneath there, vomiting, like, and it was like fast, and it hurt. Like, I was realizing, there's like some pain still attached to this, and I'm just like, God, what is this? Why am I reliving this thing? And in my face is Satan. And all of a sudden, it was like, I realized that every time the pain of being afflicted as a kid, like, the devil laughed in real time in front of my face. And so I would relive this experience, and I'm seeing Satan take delight in the pain that was inflicted on me as an innocent kid. And it was like, I was like, oh, God never intended for me to hurt. Like, there's a real enemy that came after me as an innocent person, as an innocent kid. it's really kind of changed my life and really my ministry, where I'm the church is called to bind up the brokenhearted, to see healing, but I'm at a place in my life, in my ministry now, the church I'm leading now is like, hey, I'm not just reacting to what the enemy does. I'm here to oppose the enemy.
Amen.
I'm
That's
here
good.
to say like, hey,
Yep.
you know what? I thank God for my testimony, but what if I never had to experience that? Because there was a Christian there. There was God that, was opposing what the enemy was doing. And so, right now in our church, I pastor a church in West Tennessee. It's called Faith Assembly. And I've got a nonprofit, Simon Davenport Ministries. And really all of this is, yes, we're called to bind up the brokenhearted, but I believe God's raising up a standard in the land to oppose the works of darkness, to heal, but to say no, no, in the name of Jesus.
Yes.
And it's not an angry thing. It's not a thing.
God's authority thing.
It's to say, you know what?
Yep.
We're to be salt and light on the earth, and the church has lost its saltiness. And so, you can find me online, Simon Davenport, Faith Assembly. There's tons of stuff. But I would love to meet with you there to have a conversation about what God's doing.
I think we need another conversation. I feel like we're in the middle of the conversation and we have to say see you later. But we'll work something out. We will be back, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Bye.